Hey, everybody, welcome to yet another great interview at our virtual business summit. Today, we are talking to Garth Hassel from Global View Capital Advisors, and we're going to be talking all about retirement plans, different ones that we can use when we're either have employees or ones when we're self-employed, and how to understand them and then the differences and stuff. So, without further ado, hey, Garth, tell us who you are, what you do, and a brief introduction into what we're going to be talking about.
So my name is Garth, like Garth Brooks. I can't sing, but I have friends in low places. Look at Bill over here. Last name is Hassel, and I promise I won't hassle you. I am an investment advisor representative, technically, with Global View Capital Advisors. We're a boutique SEC-registered investment advisory firm, also an insurance agent for life, health, disability, and long-term care. And we set things up to be more than independent, but also fiduciary, which is a word you hear kicked around a lot. If you have questions about that, we can address those. But basically, having been a consulting engineer for 20 years, it took me a while to find a firm that was structured in a way that supports doing the right thing for the client. So there's a lot of talk out there for doing the right thing, and you're required to do the right thing, but the back office might have other priorities. So I'm pretty happy to work with this company called Global View Capital. So I married my high school sweetheart, and here we are 34 years later with 5 kids, 4 adopted. And I mention that because there are some struggles there that involve some special needs and some taking care of my wife during a period of illness. And this comes into play in terms of what you want to be prepared for when you start a retirement plan. It's more than spreadsheets.
Okay. Cool. So I think the first thing that we should get into is the different kinds of, retirement and things that we can either do through, like, so to the different kinds and then how it applies. Are there ones that are better for someone who's just self-employed by themselves, or are there better ones for offering your employees? Let's kind of dig into that area a little bit.
You bet. So the first question to ask is, are you going to be a solopreneur, or maybe just you and a spouse working the business? Because if that's your model and that you expect to keep for, foreseeable future, then you could look at what's called a solo 401k. It gives you the most ability to contribute, because the 401k can have employee contributions and employer contributions. And when you're self-employed, you happen to be both. And you can put in quite a bit of money into that, and gives you a lot of flexibility. But if you're going to be hiring employees, if you want to grow, before you jump into the 401k realm, you'll want to consider something that's simpler. And in that universe, you've got the STEP IRA, called a simplified employee pension, although it's really not a pension. It's just an IRA. That's all employer contributions. And then there's the simple, which is another IRA that the employer is not obligated to match more than 3% of the employee's contribution. So it just kind of depends, and we can dive into these a little bit more. But the number one question you've got to be sure about before you do a solo 401k, super powerful, is, are you going to be it? Or you and your spouse going to be it?
Okay. All right, cool. So let's start breaking them down a little bit. And let's go by whether they're solo or whether they have employees. So let's start on the solo side. Um, what are the things to consider? You mentioned some of them, and then the 401k is a possible option, but like, what are the things to consider with that? How do we build that out? How does that grow? That kind of stuff. Let's dive into that.
The first advantage of a solo 401k, again, for you or you and your spouse working in the business, is you can choose between a pre-tax version and a Roth version. And a Roth, if you're not familiar with it, means it's after-tax dollars that you contribute into it. And then those dollars can compound all the way into retirement, and they come out tax-free. You've paid your tax obligation up front, and there's a lot of power in that. So you can contribute $20,500 in 1 year, and you can do it even up front. So if you're doing a side gig, you can like front load it, put the first 20,000 into it without having to pace it out over the months. If you don't want to, you can do that. And then you have to remember an employer's contribution could be another 40,500, so a total for 61,000 going into it in 1 year, which is pretty cool. If you've got the cash flow, is that employer's contribution is a tax deduction for the employer. So one thing to always remember, when the employer contributes to a retirement plan, that's going to be a deduction. So that money is tracked separately because it's not been taxed, and it'll compound with tax deferral, meaning it's taxed when it comes out. Every dollar with what's called a zero basis. In other words, there's no part that's been taxed before. All of it's not been taxed. So when it comes out in retirement, every dollar is going to be taxed as income. So you just have to keep that in mind when you project into your retirement. That say, I know people that have a 401k at a big employer and they got $1 million. And this is not the solo. I'm talking just to make this point about taxation. They've got $1 million at their employer's 401k. It's all pre-tax. Their contributions are pre-tax, lowered their taxes while they're working. The employer matched a certain amount. They get $1 million. And you ask them, are you ready for retirement? Like, yeah, I got $1 million. No, you don't, because you have no idea how much of that money is yours, because Uncle Sam has first dibs on what comes out. So just remember that when you get a tax deduction up front, then the taxation is going to be deferred, and you don't know what the calculation is going to be because that landscape is changing all the time. But from the solo versus a multiple employee situation, the 401k gives you the most options because, one, you can put in 20,500, even if it's a Roth, of your own money into it. Then your company's net profits up to 25%, another 40,500 for 61,000, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. And then you can compound it, which is, definitely very interesting. So I think that, you said that there's the 401k, and then you said there's an IRA as well for your self-employed. Okay. And then you said that the 401k is the one that is taxed, and the IRA is the one that you can get taxed now instead of later. Am I getting that correctly?
Not quite. So
Okay.
the key word for never taxed again is Roth.
Okay.
Roth. You can have a Roth, and we're probably more familiar with Roth at the IRA level. It has nothing to do with your employer. You say, I want an IRA. Well, I can put $6,000 into an IRA, whether it's, I can put 3 in a traditional, that's pre-tax, deduction now, taxed later when I take it out, and then 3,000 in a Roth where it's been taxed now, never be taxed again, or I can put the full amount in a Roth IRA. That Roth is kind of nice. But with the other small employer sponsored retirement plans, there is no Roth option.
Okay.
Except for the solo 401k. And so in a 401k, a company can choose to offer a Roth version. And when you are the you're the chief cook and bottle washer, you can say, sure, man, I'll have a Roth 401k. Just know that your business contribution is going to be a separate pot of money that's tax deferred.
Okay, so that regardless still comes out as a tax deferred later. All right, that's key to know.
Yes.
All right, cool. So now let's I think we kind of broke that one down a nice bit. So let's jump over to the other side where we have employees. Let's go a little bit more in depth with the different options that we have, but also the different ways that we can put it together, and kind of like we talked about with the other version as well.
So let's keep it. We'll start with the next one is called a SEP.
Okay.
And the SEP, what's unique about the SEP, it is an IRA. So each employee has their own. The I in IRA is individual. So that means there's a separate account number for each individual employee. but the contributions are 100% coming from the employer. So the employee can have a separate IRA that they contribute to. But with a SEP tied to an employer, that employer can choose and is not obligated to put any money in any given year, can choose to say, okay, we're going to put in, say, 10% of what your salary is. We're going to put 10% into your SEP IRA. It's 100% employer contribution. It's a deduction for the employer. It's pre-tax money for the employee, so it doesn't count as income. But when it comes out in retirement, every dollar will be taxed, and it will be subject to what's called required minimum distributions when you turn, right now it's 72. That could move to 75, but I don't think anyone watching this is at that point in their life
Yeah.
worried about that right now. But it is a good time to inject that Congress can change these rules at will. They are
Yeah,
moving.
definitely.
So every year the contribution amount limit might change. And now they're starting to move because of longevity, people living longer. They're moving that RMD, the required minimum distributions age out. It used to be 70 and a half, then 72. They're talking 75 because young folks like you, Bill, are going to live to be 110.
We'll see. All right, that's cool. All right, so we have those versions. Are there any other? We talked about that was the SEP, right? So what are the
Right.
other versions that we can do with employees?
And I'll just close out with a SEP. The limit that the employer can put in is again 25% of if you're by yourself, it can be 25% of your company's your net profits up to the 61,000. And then with the employees, that percentage will be of their salary. So if they make 100 grand, you're contributing another 25 grand. And you have to treat every employee the same. So that's a restriction with the SEP. So whatever you do for yourself as the owner, from a percentage basis, you're treating every eligible employee equally on a percentage basis. So if it's 10%, they all get 10%. So that's an important thing to remember with the SEP.
Absolutely.
So with the simple involves employee typically and employer contributions. There's two basic ways to do the simple. I've never seen it done the one way, so I won't even talk about it. It's just not popular. The more popular of the options that the IRS makes available is where an employee can say, I want X percent taken out of my paycheck. Let's say it's 5. The employer will match the first 3% dollar for dollar. So you take 5% out, and what's being deposited into your simple IRA, all of it pre-tax, is a net. The number is equal to 8% because you're getting that 3% twice. The employer is kicking in the other 3%. If you put in 2%, the employer only has to match the first 2%, dollar for dollar, 3%, dollar for dollar. Anything above that, they don't have to match, and they're not going to. It's going to be at the flat 3%. Whatever you choose, the first 3%, the employer will match dollar for dollar. So these are really common in things like dentist's office, for example, where you don't have a lot of highly paid employees, but the dentist might want to put in the max, 14,000. And so there's a little bit more headroom when you're making more money, and not everybody has to put the same amount in.
Okay. Cool. All right, so are there any other versions for the employer side besides those two that we just talked about?
Those are the main ones. So you've got 401k, the SEP, and the simple. And then otherwise you start getting into things that are called like non-qualified. And
yeah, we don't need to.
You don't need to get into that right now.
There's other options is basically what we're saying.
Yeah, and what I want to mention, and I might be jumping ahead a little bit here, Bill, but I know you're going to have people talking about employer benefits, and which is very, very important, and I look forward to seeing what he has to say. But I want to mention now that it's important that you look at these benefits holistically. I mean, the retirement plans shouldn't just be a stovepipe. You
Mm-hmm.
know, you're going to have the things that protect your income while you're able to contribute at all. You know, like your disability, understanding how that's going to work, your life insurance, how that's going to work. You know, so there's lots of ways of looking at that.
Absolutely. All right. So I think what I want to get into now is how companies start to integrate this into their business. So what do they go through when onboarding this? What are things they need to consider in order to be able to successfully enroll, successfully roll this out? Sorry, my brain is not working. But what are things they have to do in order to successfully roll this out into their employees or themselves? Like what are key metrics they should keep track of when it comes to finances to be like, oh, I am ready for this. So that's kind of what I want to get into now.
Great. So a key metric is steady cash flow, because if your cash flow isn't steady and you're promising some sort of contribution to your employees' plan, and you hit a divot or a rut,
Mhm,
and then you can't contribute, now you're in trouble. So early on, you might want something that you're not promising to have to pay into.
mhm,
But let me tell you an example. This happened to a client of mine. Now, I did not set up this company's 401k. He came to me with this story. He worked for this subcontractor that might have had, say, 100 employees,
mhm,
and they worked in this niche area. And their bread and butter was providing employees to support this niche technical work.
mhm,
Well, they had a 401k where they promised a certain amount of match and everything,
mhm,
but they hit a tough time and they laid some people off, but things were so bad. And of course, they don't typically tell the employees this.
mhm.
They were taking those payroll deductions from the employees meant to go into their 401k and paying bills with it.
Yeah.
That's, that's how desperate they were. So I tell you that because employers aren't always going to be perfect. Now I'm talking to employers here, not so much employees,
Mhm,
but understand you're going to be viewed as like rock solid. Like if you're promising a contribution, by God, you're going to do it.
mhm,
So you have to feel good enough, and have a good enough record and a broad enough client base, or sources of revenue,
mhm.
that you're promising some kind of a match. You can do it.
Yeah.
You can do it. And that's why a lot of companies don't jump into the 401k fray right away. They'll start with something that's simpler. Like the simple, it's like the worst case match they have to make is 3% of their payroll,
Mhm,
which is usually a number that's within their margin.
mhm,
So that's a big deal. It's also less administration because each employee has their individual account. It's their IRA. All you have to do is pull the money and then send the check to the custodian of the IRA. And that's your obligation for the most part, except for annual notification. So it's
mhm.
pretty simple to do that.
Yeah. Okay, definitely. So what are some other all right, so let's say we have a like I want to get into like the mechanics, if you will, of the company. So they're putting together their payroll and they've decided they're at the point where they can jump into this next piece of like a 401k
Okay.
or having it, where they're contributing. You know, what are things that are going to transpire, flow, and like this way they're kind of prepared for that process, if you understand what I'm saying.
Right. You want to have a good idea of what your payroll is,
Hmm.
okay? And your associated revenue. But the next step is picking a good partner, because and a partner, there's a couple things you want to look for in a partner. One is what's called open architecture. Open
Hmm.
architecture just means you have a lot of flexibility to customize your plan. 401k is a quotation from tax code.
Hmm.
So all the 401ks out there are not the same. There's a large IRS rule set, but each sponsor, which is the company,
Hmm.
the business owners, they can they can pick and choose how they want to do things. They can say, is this a profit sharing only? Where it's like, you know what, we'll put money in if we have a good year, and if we don't have to put any in. Or we can set it up where we're going to have a match. So you want to have a third party that works with you that's really, number one, easy to work with, open architecture, kind of committed to your space. Because we're not talking to the Boeings of the world in this summit here. Then we're talking to the startups and maybe 100 employees, that kind of thing. And in that realm, there are companies that specialize in that level of revenue and number of employees, 401ks. Related to that is the employee experience. So, and a lot of employees, especially when they hire onto a company, they just are checking off in their mind, what benefits do I have? Oh, I got medical, I got sick leave, vacation time, and oh yeah, 401k. And they're not thinking through really what that means. What are the details that really distinguish potential employer A versus potential employer B. So if you can bring in a partner who's going to make it easy on your employees to not only participate, but to understand where they are. I like using one partner that gives people a single page that summarizes their big picture, summarizes what they've done and where they're going. Just one page. People don't have to, it's not like reading a prospectus where you have to go through 200 pages of 8 font, People will never do that.
Exactly.
So you want them to have a sense of accomplishment. That's why they're doing it. It's not just because, well, gee, I want to have a 401k at my next employer. But you as the employer want to know how you want to design your benefits, because you're competing. Labor's short right now and you want to be competitive. So how do you articulate that, as a good competitor, you know your competition, you know what they're offering there. You understand that, and it's not just a matter of one-upping them, because you might one-up them on a spreadsheet, but the recruit pool doesn't really see the difference. So how do you get them to see where they are super easily and feel good about what they're doing? And that takes some special levels of communication, a lot of short, frequent educational pieces coming from your partner. On-site education is helpful for that, giving people a nugget at a lunch and learn that they can walk away saying, I'm this much smarter, and all I did was eat 3 pieces of pizza.
Yeah, absolutely.
And back to the open architecture, what people offer is not always the same. So we all have heard of Vanguard, right? We know people that go to have Vanguard and Fidelity as their 401k platform. I will tell you right now, all you have to do is Google this. You can Google employees suing their employer because the employer isn't doing their due diligence for what they're offering on the 401k. That's rampant. And another thing is happening right now, another trend is employees suing their employer. This is all over the 401k. It's what's called target date funds. So target date funds, and this is worth mentioning because when you onboard your employees, they take a quick survey, and the idea is to know if they're going to be conservative, moderate, balanced, growth, or aggressive, in their risk tolerance.
Yeah.
And a lot of people blow that off, and if they don't do that, if your third party isn't helping people get through that step, because there's a liability of the sponsor, the employer, in doing the right thing for their employees, because there is liability with this. They've got to put that money somewhere for people who don't respond to the questionnaire. So there's what's called qualified default investment alternatives, QDIAs, and they're just going to be age-based. So, if you're 40, they're going to put you, in like a growth. If you're 50, they're going to put you in like a balanced. If you're 60, they're going to put you in something more conservative, something along those lines.
Mhm.
But you would rather communicate more effectively to get your employees engaged, that even if they miss the memo in the first year they're employed, they were overwhelmed, they might have been relocating, had a baby, who knows what. You want to be able to, keep dripping and get them involved so they can really participate and see where they're going with this.
Mhm.
Right now, there's a spat of lawsuits going on about these target date funds. So say you'll be 65 around 2029. So they'll put
Mhm.
you in like a 2030 target date fund because they're spaced like in 5-year increments. So you have 2020, 2020, 25, 30, 35, et cetera. But anyway, there's just a lot of snarling going on about whether they're actually that good or not. And what's interesting is that whether the fund is a T. Rowe Price or a Vanguard or a Fidelity or somebody else's target date fund for the same year, say 2035, they don't look alike. So they're
Mhm.
not all the same.
Yeah.
The target date fund is a lazy person's way of getting into the investment game and of assigning an investment to a non-responsive employee. But you want to be better than that as much as possible as an employer. So
Mhm.
your 401k partner needs to make it easy for you to convey to your employees that, when they sign up, they click the online enrollment to their 401k, which they can do any time of year. It's not just at open enrollment for like medical benefits. They can do that
Mhm.
anytime. That they know what they're getting into. They know what to expect. They know it's not going to take, more than 20 minutes. And they know that when they do it, they're already going to start seeing what their progress is towards their retirement.
Yeah.
So that communication and understanding is huge. So the trend out there is employers, because they're so busy, running their business, they tend to just want cheap.
Mhm.
But you do get what you pay for. So just having a cheap 401k is not the way to go. It's not the singular litmus test. You might need to pay a little bit more for a good employee onboarding and ongoing experience, and especially if they've got a personal rep in the area who will come into their shop and teach the employees. We're all being zoomed to death.
Yeah.
You can always offer the Zoom option, and people say, it's going to be recorded. I'll watch it later, and they never do. So when you can show up and be live and engage back and forth, it's so much better if you can pull that off.
Absolutely. Cool. So we've definitely unpacked a lot about retirement plans, how to implement them into your business, whether you're self-employed by yourself in a business or you have employees. Also talked about some of the expenses and what they have to get ready in order to be able to accomplish this. Some of the precautions they need to be taking, as you said, so that they're not going to miss payments they have to make. Also, some liabilities that they have, which we just covered. So before we get into actionable steps of things that they should do when they're looking to implement these plans, is there anything else that you think we should touch on?
Well, know your overall goals up front. You know, uh, and know if you want your employees to be financially, I'll say, literate. And I mean, people might say that's a dumb question. Of course we do, but we can all say, yeah, we do. But what do we do about it? And I'll just mention that financial literacy, you don't need a bunch of economists working for you, but if people are struggling financially, that will overflow into the workplace. Either the angst or the spats they're having with family members or their creditor who's putting repoing their car or whatever. That kind of stress overflows into what's called presenteeism in the workplace, where people are butts in seat but their heads somewhere else.
Hmm.
Or worse, there could be a motivation for, embezzlement or even petty theft at work. You just don't want that to even start at
Absolutely.
your workplace. So injecting a little bit of financial education and finding a partner who is proactive and ready, willing, and able to step in and do that in bite-sized, frequent increments, that's a big deal. That's a big
Hmm.
deal.
Awesome. All right. So, what are some actionable steps that they can take? And that one that you mentioned is kind of a proactive one as well. But like, what are some additional actionable steps that people can take when they're looking to get into this area?
So define your goals. We covered that.
Hmm.
Okay, so you say, okay, we want to go the 401k route. Number two, it's like, well, who do we find that can do this? You could talk to your corporate accounting. I don't know if you're starting up, just that's someone who's not employed by you. If you're a little bit bigger, that could be in-house. But you can look through your accounting people, because they're the ones that are going to be doing a lot of behind-the-scenes interfacing and dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and are concerned about that financial liability, which is tied to ERISA, which I won't get into that, but that is a buzzword acronym for the law that matters with this stuff. So your accounting people have to feel good about it. So whoever's running your numbers needs to feel good, and they might have connections, and they're going to look for you're going to want a third party who can constantly vet things out for you, because there's an obligation for doing a due diligence at least every 3 years, which is like shopping around for what's the best offerings within your 401k. How much flexibility do we have? Can we put in things like precious metals and something that has to do with real estate and these other areas, maybe even crypto, um, that's a powder keg. But the point is, you don't just want to be stuck with, small, medium, large cap and an international fund and call it good. Can you get different kinds of funds in there that are more cost effective and a lot more specific, and people can be more creative and more deliberate in designing what they're going to invest in. So, ask those people, ask, your chamber of commerce, people that And I say that because it's nice to have someone who's got a local connection. That's not always going to happen. But the third party administrators, these are people who aren't the Vanguards and Fidelities of the world. These are people that focus on a lot of these corporate benefits. They can tell you stories, good, bad, the ugly, with company ABC or XYZ, and open architecture and committed to that space, and excellent with employee communications. So the employer has the least amount of lifting to do to make this happen. And one more, and
Hmm.
that is, will the third party, or maybe it might be plural, take on the maximum what's called 338 liability? And no one, you don't have to remember the 338 part, but there is a liability mentioned before with 401ks specifically, and you want, as the employer, to offload as much as possible from your plate to their plate, because that's what they do. That's their bread and butter. That they do that. You do your business niche. You don't want to have to become the expert in the 401k or the medical plans for that matter, right?
Hmm.
You want to focus on running your business and let the third parties work in your benefit, vetting out what's the best value. And that's not a one-time deal. That's at least every few years. With medical, they're doing it constantly, all year long, and every year with adjustments to their plans, or they've at least decided they're not going to adjust it.
Hmm.
So 401ks aren't a whole lot different. You need to be constantly seeing what's developing in the marketplace. For example, new laws come out, and now you can get small employee pool plans. And so who's in the lead doing that? Can I get the Costco version of a 401k when I'm just a handful of people? They have these small employee pools now. There's not a lot of experience with this. There's not a lot of history, There aren't lawsuits yet because they haven't existed long enough. You know, um, you might want to say, I don't want to get into that because it's so new. Let the other people figure that out. Have you ever heard the expression that uh, pioneers get shot and settlers get rich, right?
Mhm.
So if you're on the leading edge of a new development, you're probably going to run into some hiccups. But I
Mhm.
say that because you still want someone who's on that leading edge in your space, because we're talking to a group of small to medium-sized business owners here.
Mhm.
You want that flexibility. You don't want to be stuck with what's called a safe harbor 401k.
Mhm.
That's the lazy persons. That's the target date fund laziness of investing applied to the 401k plan. And that's called a safe harbor. And that's just being lazy. And you shouldn't have to put up with that.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. So we definitely went through a lot, went through some great actionable steps. So I really thank you for your time, Garth, and everybody watching. I hope you all got something out of it. And I will see everybody in the networking event tonight at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time.